Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dick Seligman from Caltech, and this is my distinguished colleague, David Robinson, from the Oregon Health and Sciences University. And this afternoon, we're going to talk with you a little bit about the 21st Century Cures Act and the implications in that act for the FDP. We're also going to talk, as time permits, about a couple of other pieces of legislation that have recently been signed by the President. So first of all, the slides that you're looking at are going to be much more detailed than the presentation that David and I will make. We're not going to try to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but the slides are a little bit more detailed so that if you want to use them or look at them after you get back home, they will be available on the FDP website. How many of you have read the 21st Century Cures Act? Okay, then I'm counting on you to help me if I miss anything. So this law was enacted, signed by the President on December 13th. It has over 400 pages, which I have not read, but it has one section in particular that's of interest to us, and that deals with reducing administrative burden for researchers. And the topics that are addressed in that section include conflict of interest, subrecipient monitoring, financial reporting, animal care and use, documentation of personnel expenses, and the establishment of a research policy board. But remember, this is one section out of many that deal with a wide variety of topics. So let's start with conflict of interest. First of all, the American Cures Act is directed primarily at the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institutes of Health. And there's some complicated reasons for that, but in a number of sections, what is written into the law may or may not apply to other cabinet level organizations within the executive branch of the government. So with regard to conflict of interest, the law says that within 2 years of the enactment, the Secretary of Health and Human Services is going to lead a review by research funding agencies of all of the rules and regulations and policies related to conflict of interest, financial conflict of interest, and is going to make revisions to harmonize the existing policies and reduce administrative burden. The Secretary is also going to confer with the Office of the Inspector General about the activities of that office as they relate to financial conflicts of interest. The Secretary is going to be rather busy because he will also have to modify the timelines for reporting of financial interests to just in time, which I think may be a very beneficial change, and ensure that financial interest disclosures are appropriate for and relevant to the awards that are being made. So that's a quick look at the impact on conflict of interest. The second section deals with subrecipient monitoring. And again, the language of this law references the National Institutes of Health. And so again, whether these provisions will apply to other agencies, it is not something that we really have any information on. So this talks about the fact that this time it's the director of NIH, not the Secretary of Health and Human Services. But the director of the NIH is going to take a look at subrecipient monitoring and is going to be able to exempt from subrecipient monitoring certain situations which are spelled out here. So the primary awardee is not going to have to monitor subrecipients if the subrecipient is subject to the Single Audit Act audit. And here's the part where I begin to get a little confused. And it goes on to say that the primary awardee conducts a pre-award evaluation of each subrecipient's risk of noncompliance. That appears to be somewhat of a contradiction, because if we're going to exempt institutions from conducting subrecipient monitoring, how can that then happen if the primary recipient also has to conduct a pre-award risk assessment of the subrecipient? Another feature of this section of the Act is that one way that the government can reduce the requirements for subrecipients or subrecipient monitoring is to reduce the number of subawards that are being issued by, and it doesn't really elaborate on this, but it talks about the implementation of alternative grant structures that eliminate the need for subrecipient monitoring. Again, we're not sure exactly what that means, but it will be interesting to find out. Financial reporting. This provision talks about both the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Director of NIH, and basically says that they need to get together and coordinate the requirements that they have for financial reporting so that we eliminate the problems that currently exist with one set of financial reports required by the NIH and a second set required by HHS or PHS. And this should, if properly implemented, reduce some of the back and forth that we now see in the financial closeout process. Animal care and use. In this section of the law, we involve the Director of NIH, the Secretary of Agriculture, and the Commissioner of Food and Drugs, the FDA Commissioner. And basically, they are told to identify ways to minimize the redundancy and the overlap in the various rules and regulations that they have regarding the care and use of animals in research. Of course, they have to do this without reducing the appropriate care or the appropriate consideration for the care of laboratory animals. How that will be done, now we're talking about 3 different agencies of the government. How that will be done, again, we don't know. Documentation of personnel expenses. This one I found to be quite interesting. And you may think that if anyone could find this interesting, that they must lead an extremely dull existence. But in this case, the law directs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to clarify the requirements of the uniform guidance for the management and certification systems adopted by entities that receive federal funds. And then that is to include clarification of the extent to which any flexibility can be applied to NIH grants. Now, I found this really interesting because I thought it was the requirement of OMB to provide clarifications to the uniform guidance. And so here we have one federal agency being directed to clarify a provision of the uniform guidance. And it isn't at all clear whether that clarification would apply to any other recipients of federal funds. Thank you. Probably the most significant section of the law when it comes to our part of the world, is the provision for the establishment of a research policy board. At past FDP meetings, we've heard about the proposals for a research policy board. And in fact, David Robinson is a member of the committee at the National Academies of Science that first proposed the research policy board. Now, the board, as spelled out in the law, is not quite identical to the original proposal that was in the Academy report, but there are some very distinct similarities. So first of all, the board is going to consist of two groups of people. First, 10, not more than 10 federal members, and 4 of those individuals are specifically identified by their titles. So there's somebody from OMB, somebody from OSTP, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Director of the National Science Foundation. Then there's another category, and it can be secretaries of other cabinet departments or directors of other agencies that support research, and this will be determined by the director of OMB. Then the second portion of the policy board will be comprised of not less than 9 or more than 12 representatives of academic research institutes, other private nonprofit research institutes, or other nonprofit organizations with relevant expertise. And these 9 to 12 members will be appointed by a formal process that will be established by the director of OMB. So, applications for these positions are available at the back of the room. It will be fascinating to see, A, how they go about identifying and appointing the non-federal members. And so this is a chance for you to consider serving your country. Yes, the way this is written, any of us could apply. There isn't an entrance exam. You don't necessarily have to have a particular degree. So let's see how it works out. What is the board supposed to do? Well, there's a long list of things that the board is supposed to do, so it's going to be a very busy group. And one of the interesting things about the law is that it doesn't say anything at all about the staffing that will be provided to support the group. Well, that could mean a couple of different things, including the expectation that the board members are going to be rolling up their sleeves and doing the work themselves. So basically, what their responsibility is involves looking at all of the existing regulations and policies, identifying those that have negative or adverse consequences, and making recommendations for the improvement of those policies. that sounds like the work that your committee was supposed to have done, and did to a very great extent. But now it's going to be done again by an even more exalted group.
They're getting practice.
So they are also to create a forum for the discussion of research policy and regulatory gaps, challenges, clarification, or harmonization of such policies. And then the number 5 is one that I think should be near and dear to the hearts of everyone in the FDP. They are to conduct ongoing assessment and evaluation of regulatory burden, including the development of metrics, periodic measurement, and identification of process improvements and policy changes. What does that remind you of? Well, it should remind you, to a great extent, of the work that the FDP has been doing for the last many years. And whether the Research Policy Board will simply charge the FDP with continuing its work in this area, or whether they will take a different approach, of course, we don't know. So there are a few strings attached to the creation of the board. First of all, the board, within 2 years of its creation, is going to have to submit a report to OMB that talks about their formal recommendations. And so that gives them 2 years, which is actually about the amount of time that your committee had. And then, by September 30th of 2021, it will terminate. So there is a sunset provision. So the board is not going to go on forever and ever, although certainly Congress could determine to continue the board. And then 4 years after the enactment of this law, the General Accounting Office is ordered to conduct an independent evaluation of the work that's been carried out by the board. So there's going to be a lot of people looking over each other's shoulders. I'm going to stop now and ask David to talk about 2 more pieces of legislation, also signed very recently, and then, if there's time remaining, we will attempt to answer your questions, although that will be a real challenge, because basically what we know is what you've heard and will hear in the next few minutes. We have no inside information. We'll check our tweets in the meantime and see if there are any new developments. Actually, I can't do that because I don't have an account.
I did just tweet a lovely picture of you.
Thank you.
That was obviously a work of creative art. So actually, I'm just going to speak briefly about 2 things, but I should also acknowledge, I think I saw JR wander in here. Could JR wave his hand? So JR was also a committee member, and Olivia O'Hare here at the front, wave your arm. She was one of the staff members at the time working on the National Academy's staff, who did a huge amount of work getting out the report actually to where it was today. So I want to give them a shout out. It wasn't all me, far from all me, thank goodness. So something I know very little about at all is defence, and I'm going to talk about that now, so you've got an expert. But just recently, as he puts up here, the National Defence Authorization Act, the NDAA of 2017, was also just recently signed into law, December 23rd by the President. And this is much longer than the 21st Century Cures Act. In fact, it's got 55 sections or titles, as they call them. It's over 950 pages in length, or at least it was when I loaded it onto my computer and waited for it to download for a while. But you can see, really what the the NDA is all about, and very little, obviously, of that large document is directly affects us. Probably individually in various institutions it might, but as an organisation it doesn't really affect us very much, apart from just one section which I've called out here, and I know there was probably some discussion earlier about this in a previous session that I couldn't get to, but in section 217, if you want to go and look at it, there is a section called Increased Micro Purchase Threshold for Research Programs and Entities, and in the NDA 2017, as we've all been asking for, since the Uniform Guidance came out, the threshold for micro purchases is actually raised to $10,000. Now, my initial thought, until I got some insider information or some clarification from someone who knows a lot more than I do, is that my thought was, well, the 10,000 limit is fine to the people who are on defence grants and that kind of thing, but actually it turns out that the National Defence Authorization Act actually sets this limit for all federal agencies, not just those who are actually in the defence part of the federal government. So eventually this act is saying to all agencies, please raise your micro threshold purchases to $10,000. So that's obviously something the FDP and many other people have been obviously advocating for what, actually we don't advocate, sorry. That's what an awful lot of the advocacy agencies do, and that's just something that we pointed out might be a good thing to reduce the burden of monitoring and managing a $3,000 threshold. Just the amount of work needed at each of our universities to put that to practice would be absolutely humongous. Now, not to be left out, in the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act, which actually was signed just a few days ago, January 16th, by the President. Once again, a much shorter document, but once again, Title II of that Act, there is an administrative and regulatory burden reduction section. And one of the, there's a few things I'm going to go through here, but right at the bottom here, you'll also notice that it calls out, and this really, this particular act only can cover NSF, NASA, and NIST, but it does actually call out again the fact that the micro purchase threshold for those should also be raised, though is kind of duplicative in some respects because that's already signed into law previously. But in this particular act, there is the establishment of an interagency working group, and that was talked about a little bit earlier today. Essentially, for the purposes of reducing administrative burden in federally funded researchers, and that's in section 201 of this particular act. And then within 1 year, the NSF Inspector General needs to prepare and submit to Congress, essentially, an audit of the Foundation's policies and procedures governing the monitoring of pass-through entities with respect to subrecipients. So that's another, there's a bullet. The bullet points there we'll have to correct because there's a carriage return in there, but that's in section 206, and so that's another layer of legislation regarding subrecipient monitoring. And again, there is this increase, the raising of the micro threshold purchase, at least for those three agencies that it can do. So those are all fairly significant changes that I think most of my institutions will be very happy with. I think the other thing I wanted to highlight in section 201, which is really the major section that talks about regulatory burden, there's a whole bunch of findings that kind of start out this section, which I thought I should highlight because, along with some of the wording that Dick suggested earlier, this is really in line with a lot of what the FDP has been trying to do, and even you'll recognize some of this language, the FDP and maybe the National Academies Committee and some of the work we did there as well. But, we can jump around on these, but if you go down to section B6, it immediately calls out the FDP researchers spend as much as 42% of their time complying with federal regulations. Obviously, we know where that number comes from. Obviously, people are looking at the monitoring and the assessment that the FDP is doing and are taking notice. I think that's obviously a pat on the back, and we should continue doing all the hard work we're doing. if we go to the top here, there is a recognition in this law that there is a substantial and increasing administrative burden and the costs in federal research administration, especially in the higher education sector. That's where most are from. And this is eroding potentially funds to carry out the basic research. So there's more administrative costs, and so there's less money in the pot to actually directly fund the research that's going on. It does call out, and I think we have to call this out. There has been a lot of work done to streamline pre-award grant application process. We're continuing to streamline that. Obviously, the FDP works very closely with the Joint Application Development Group. JAD. I can never exactly remember what all the acronyms mean. But to continue to streamline and improve grants.gov, so that is nice for this to be called out in the legislation as well, though it's not just the work of the FDP that's being called out. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of agency unique compliance and reporting requirements that we would like to have, that the law would essentially like us to start harmonizing, which obviously reduces burden in the long run. I think, and this comes from many different advocacy agencies. We also called it out in the report, but our thought on the report was clearly the administrative burdens, the amount of time spent doing these research activities is reducing the return on investment of federally funded research. Obviously, that has a significant impact on the competitiveness of the United States in the world. And obviously, they really want to, the people who wrote the law, Congress approved it, really want to address this and make sure that the administrative burden is appropriate. Obviously, it's needed, and there's some requirement for administrative compliance and overhead, but make it proportional to the amount of research that's being done. So I think that it's a good thing to look at and realize that really the FDP, along many other groups, are actually doing some good work, and that we should keep going on and doing that work, and we continue to participate in making, reducing the administrative burden in the discharge of federally funded research. So I think now what we were planning on doing was to really, I think probably the best thing, because what we want to do is bring everybody up to speed. We've got plenty of time, obviously. That was the us talking, you listening is not what we want. It's actually we want to hear from you, and we want an active discussion going along here. I think what we were going to, we weren't going to do that, I was going the wrong way. I was actually going to go to the start here and then start asking people for their thoughts on these various changes, or these changes to legislation, and then maybe how the FDP, where appropriate, might be able to take action or start doing some work, or what we should be focusing our attention on going forward in 2017. That was the plan, right?
Yes.
So this is a free-for-all. So if we all sit here quietly, it'd be very boring, and there's only so much song and dance I can do at any one time. So I'm really looking for people in the audience who know a lot more about financial conflict of interest than I do, though I will declare I have no financial conflicts of interest. If only I had any financial conflicts of interest, I'd be much better off. So people's reactions, various groups, thoughts on what you've learned here.
Well, I have a question for you.
You should answer my question.
Okay. So, having read all of this, I was left with the following question. Since last summer, we've been hearing about the clarification that OMB was going to publish, dealing with, among other things, the procurement standards, particularly the procurement standard for micro purchases, and also a new set of FAQs relating to the uniform guidance. Subsequently, we heard that it's coming, and it's coming. And now, with less than 2 weeks remaining in the current administration, the question that I have is, A, is it coming, and B, how do all of these recently enacted laws impact what OMB was proposing to do. Is there anybody here from OMB? Would anyone else like to try to answer that question? Yes.
So, Libby O'Hare, Association of Independent Research Institutes. So I can speak, Dick, to the piece about micro purchases only. Would that be helpful?
Well, it would be a great beginning.
A small micro beginning, I suppose. Sorry, I've been working on the issue for a long time, so a lot of jokes. So ARI has been working closely with Coder on this issue. And so as these various bills have been moving through Congress, so the NDAA, and then some of the bills that you all have talked about this afternoon, we've also, of course, been monitoring what's been happening with OMB. And for those of you that were just in the session downstairs, there's some ambiguity around some of the language with going higher than 10K and cognizant executive agency, et cetera. And so you're absolutely right that some of that would need to be resolved with with a new notice from OMB. But I can't tell you anything more other than that Gil keeps saying that it's coming and it's coming and it's coming. But so I think other than that, we don't know. But you're right. I mean, we're now down to 9 days. But what I can say is that it is good that both things were certainly happening at the same time, and that the OMB work was ongoing as well as the sort of work legislatively.
Thank you. I suppose, well, this is more of a question. Even after a new administration takes over, would it be possible for OMB to continue to issue its clarifications and FAQs, or will that have to go back to square one to be vetted by the new administration?
Well, it will be possible for the new administration. Because, well, Gil and others at OMB, they are career staff, and they are working on projects. They will keep working on the projects they are working on.
For those of you who don't know this very distinguished gentleman in the corner,
It's not here.
who's officially not here, this is Kei Koizumi from the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And he really should have been up here giving this talk. Why don't you push the stop button? But for reasons
I have no
that,
idea how I do that, so I'm just
okay, for reasons I don't fully understand, the members of OSTP were not able to make formal presentations this week. Yes?
But isn't the real question whether what is just recently done going to get revetted by the new administration?
Actually,
Can you say?
Whisper into the microphone.
Well, for most of these things, because this is law.
It's law.
This is law that's
Yeah.
been passed by Congress and signed by the president. So it has a standing beyond this administration, which I think one of the major accomplishments of this past month is getting these 3 pieces of legislation signed. So what we're talking about, what you see up there, that is now law. And yes, it will require agencies and OMB to implement them, but the requirement for them to implement them is in this law.
Yeah.
Hi, Sheila Lishwick from Clemson University. There's 2 other pieces of pending legislation that I came across, and I don't know what the status of it is. The first one is Research and Development Efficiency Act, and then the University Regulations Streamline and Harmonization Act of 2016.
I think
Have
the
you
last
seen
one,
about
the last one is the Lipinski Act, right?
I think
I
so.
think that one is just sitting, right? It's kind of subsumed by really this. Lipinski came out and was a very strong proponent or a strong supporter, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just going with what I read in the news, of the 21st Century Cures Act, right? And I don't think that particular bill that you're talking about is going to keep moving forward. Are you?
That's my understanding,
Yeah.
that, most of the Pisky bill's components were
Incorporated
incorporated
into
into
the
the AICA.
Yeah, okay.
And some other pieces ended up in cures, and I think the remainder, I'm not sure it'll be worthwhile for Congressman Lipinski to reintroduce what's left.
And, there were some differences between what was being proposed in that bill, especially around the Research Policy Board, I think, as well, versus what actually made it into this. But I think, from what I read, he and the other supporters of that bill were very satisfied with the outcome of the 21st Century Cures Act. Now, the other one, what was the other one? I'd never heard of that one.
It's HR 1119, Research and Development Efficiency Act.
It would probably have to be reintroduced again, and I'm not sure, I've forgotten exactly what's in that one.
Yeah.
Except that I think it died, and that most of whatever was going to make it, made it into these bills.
If it hasn't happened by now, it would have to start all over again through the whole process, I would imagine. Do you know anything, Libby?
I'm pretty sure that was a bill essentially just calling for some additional studies. And so that was really just, again, more, that had less teeth than some of the bills that we've talked about here with Cures bill and the Lipinski bill and others that have all sort of now been fed into the Cures bill. Okay, thank you.
So any other, before I go to the next slide, from a financial conflict of interest, any concerns maybe from people about these particular parts of the 21st Century Cures Act? Okay, I'm just going to keep going. Subrecipient monitoring. Obviously we're doing a lot on subrecipient monitoring. I think we have a very fine piece of work going on at the FDP. Obviously, a bunch of you must have learned about that this morning when there was a report out, I imagine, right? So, any thoughts specifically about the clearinghouse? Do you want to say anything, Pamela? You're itching.
Well,
Do you want to get up and say something so people can hear you? That'd be easy.
Sure, yeah.
I think my challenge with I do think FDP is doing amazing stuff with the expanded clearinghouse. If you haven't already had the chance to see it, please do. Jennifer Barron talked about it this morning. And we just had a session. I think my challenge here is this language isn't clear, right? Relative to what we get or don't get. For subrecipient monitoring, the Lipinski bill had, for example, much better language in it, and now it doesn't appear that it's likely to go anywhere. So obviously the big key there is this pre-award evaluation of each subrecipient's risk of noncompliance. We were hoping to get the safe harbor of saying if you're an A133 entity and the federal government is continuing to give you money, then we don't need to monitor each other because our auditors and the federal government is already taking care of it. This doesn't, it's good, it's hopeful, but it doesn't get us all the way there. So I think one of our challenges is going to be how can we work with this language that's there and get it where we would like to be? Is there any way we can get it by clarification or by some other method of get it where we want it to be?
It sounds like half a harbor.
Yeah. Right, it's like a safe coast, but you don't actually get in. Yeah.
And one other concern is that if you look at the language in the law, it only applies to the Department of Health and Human Services and NIH. So what are the other agencies going to do with regard to subrecipient monitoring? So I think the clearinghouse has a long life ahead of it.
Now, in some respects, this is just obviously law and wording, and it's got to be put into practice, right? And we have hopefully very good relations with the director of the National Institutes of Health, or at least his staff, come fairly frequently. NIH are in the room, I've seen someone's pointing at somebody over here, but who's not raising their arm. So the National Institutes of Health is trying to remain quiet in the room, but so I mean, it's just the onus is on us to try and provide whatever information we can to help the development of the interpretation of this law and put into process is as least burdensome as possible and provides. I can quite understand why. I can clearly understand why. I want to be clear about that. That the institution who's getting the money has some responsibility to make sure the people they're passing the money to should be upright, upstanding individuals and upstanding institutions as far as how they handle money. I mean, I don't think that's a problem. I think that should be an expectation. But how it's done and how much, what does a pre-award risk assessment actually include? I mean, and that's not defined.
It sounds like you're saying that if a penalty can become a tax, that a half harbor can become a harbor.
I'll save you there.
Save me, please.
No, so let me ask, outside of advocacy, because FTP doesn't do that, could we
Do you
not?
mind speaking into the microphone?
I mean, I'm asking a question.
We want to hear it.
Well, other people want to hear it. I can hear it, but other people can't. It's a terrible room to hear in the back.
But there's just a question, the people who had the microphone before were providing answers. All right, so.
This line of work.
It's fine. All right. So outside of advocacy, could FDP ask for clarification if the clearinghouse would meet that requirement? So write a letter, right, David? I mean, he writes letters for us all the time. Is he in the room?
That's not this David. I don't
Okay.
write letters.
But to seek clarification, because if not, then what's going to end up happening is that we would then have a demonstration where we use the clearinghouse. It would be a recruitment effort of institutions. We would do it and then get audited and see if it was good enough, right?
Yeah.
So, but the hope early on, before we even did that, is just to see if what we've done with the clearinghouse is sufficient. Do we not do that with FDP?
Well, I would say, since NIH is a partner federal agency, this says pursuant to guidance of the NIH that, we could volunteer to work with NIH in helping craft, their guidance that would be the least administratively burdensome. And, it might turn into, if the clearinghouse had this one other element, or, I think you're on the right track, though, that there are things that the FDP could do in this area to help. And then with it being NIH, then that could start out as, well, this is sort of a pilot or a demonstration, and if it works with NIH, shouldn't all the other agencies maybe put in research terms and conditions that they're also going to go by the same guidance that NIH uses, or something like that?
Yeah, question.
I'm under the impression from last year's conversation that Coger was also involved in the momentum for the safe harbor. So I'm wondering if there's anybody from Coger that might be able to speak to.
Well, actually, Pamela Webb, who was just.
Yeah, Coger is. Coger is really actively engaged in this topic as well, and that's the nice thing is there are a lot of the people that work with Coger are on their committees, are just working on their initiatives are also FDP members, and I can tell you that subrecipient monitoring has been and will continue to be a major push from Coger, so that's. And we helped through Coger with creating or recommending, I should say, some of the language, for example, that went into the Lipinski bill with these FAQs that are under consideration. So obviously there's that symbiotic relationship between the two organizations that really helps push this topic. And some of, for example, of what Cindy did, sometimes FDP can't advocate for a certain position, but Coger can. And there's lots of us that are on both sides.
And then the flip side of that is that we can work with NIH as a
Yes.
partner where Coger can't
Can't
do
do
that.
that.
They,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think we each have a really nice role to play in that because it dovetails well with either a demonstration or an advocacy.
And we would say that FDP can never advocate for anything. Because we're being
But we can
recorded,
educate.
we can educate, we can provide information, we just can't advocate. For the record. So just flicking through the slides, unless someone else has something about, I mean, obviously, what's going on in the clearinghouse is obviously a major component of this and will be, hopefully, a big be-all and end-all, hopefully, of a large section of the response, at least from the NIH perspective. Now we're getting into very areas that I know absolutely nothing about, so someone's going to have to help me on financial reporting. But, there isn't much in here, and so does anyone have any thoughts or, feedback?
Who here is involved in the financial closeout of NIH grants? Okay, so according to this section of the law, there are two reports that are currently being required. One by NIH and the other by the Department of Health and Human Services. Would one of you stand up and explain those two and why it would be a good idea to eliminate the overlap and confusion? I see a very distinguished speaker.
We have another very distinguished speaker.
Okay.
I don't know if there are actually two reports. You have to file a final SFR, SF 425 in the Commons, and then generally speaking, your letter of credit account is at PMS, which is part of DHHS. And for that, you have to do quarterly financial reports reconciling your cash to their cash. So that's going to happen one way or another. I guess NSF has eliminated that in the sense that they only require you to submit your cash draws. You never actually have to file a final SF 425. So you would eliminate that burden if you took that away from the Division of Payment Management. I'm not sure if that, they could do that. It would be a new system.
Yes, I think that, at least in theory, it ought to be possible to live with one of those two activities and not necessarily both. But Stanford has found a way to resolve this problem.
Stanford?
You may not want to know where we found a solution, but in NSF, for many years, we didn't have to do a FFR at the end of the individual award. We just would report on a quarterly FFR that we would send into them on all our awards. And now that NIH has gone to almost totally now a single draw by individual award, the necessity, we would think, to file a quarterly FFR to tell them what kind of expenditures we spent, we're telling them that now as we do our individual draw for each individual award. So the hope is that we, as she said, we could get away from it like NSF did, no longer do the quarterly report, and I hope just do the annual, or either the annual or the final FFR for NIH awards. And so I'm hoping that that's what we are able to get to.
Right, but it's a requirement at the Division of Payment Management.
Yes.
So we would they'd have to change it there, which would mean changing it for a whole bunch of other people as well.
Good point.
And that's probably one of the reasons it hasn't happened yet, because it's not quite as simple as.
Yeah, what would the people that think of management service do if they weren't able to? Different school.
Was that San Jose State?
Where they are.
Moving on. So, animal care and use in research. This is something, I can always call people out because I've got the microphone and I know people sitting in the room. So JR is in the room, and he's very passionate about this particular subject. So would you come up and just A, because we're recording it, and B, this room's terrible for hearing, but do you have initial thoughts when you read this, you know?
So my initial thought was surprised that it made the legislation a particular topic carved out, whereas human subjects was carved out in many places throughout the report. But, so first reaction, surprise. Second reaction, opportunity. So even though this is calling out NIH and USDA and FDA, by the way, FDA doesn't do that much animal research, so they were caught up in the moment, I think, in writing the legislation. I think it speaks more broadly than those three agencies. Somewhere, I don't see it.
I may not put all the language in there.
No, looks like it was abbreviated someplace. But the actual legislation refers to the federal agency shall. So it's as if these three agencies will be the ringleaders for a much broader discussion. Maybe Libby has some comment on the intent of the legislation being more broad than just these three agencies, but think about that. But still, you know, this I think represents a unique opportunity for the animal care world, and will require us to get together and really talk this through. Now, one thing about all these topics that I think we need to keep in mind is the research policy. Because if that can get established quickly, game changer. Because all of these topics can then be discussed in the context of the policy board, and the policy board can then extend the discussion to multiple agencies. So the policy board has a huge responsibility, and it's not just the policy board, but the legislation also points out that the policy board can implement working groups with specialty kinds of interests. So that's really important too. So any given piece of legislation, any existing policies are fair game. So this part of the act, taken in that kind of overall context, can bring in other features of the world that we live in today. So if I can add one more thing, one thing that you folks didn't include is a section on rigor and reproducibility later in the legislation. And it calls for, I think, the director of NIH to bring together a group and start pounding out some policies. So that's going to be something we're going to need to keep our eye on very, very closely. Thanks.
So I'll just say about the FDA question. So I think folks probably have heard the broader conversation about cures, right? Is the speeding approved drug and medical device approval. So probably because the NIH pieces in this bill are actually rather a small part of the bill. And so because so much of the bill was focused on FDA, that's probably why somebody threw FDA in here.
Except for the authorization part.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Thanks.
And so I've got like 5 presentations open here. So one of the, when JR and I did our presentation a year ago on the first report, one of the things for the National Academy is one of the things that we were asking for, and I just want to ask JR whether this fits in nicely, but one of the things that we, under the IACOC area, was asking OMB to convene representatives from various agencies to develop a unified federal approach for the development, promulgation, and management of policies and regulations pertaining to the care and animal use. So essentially creating a single set of rules, regulations, and guidelines, JR. Do the changes in this particular law allow that or help that to occur?
Yes, so this time I'll bring the legislation with me. So part 1 there The legislation reads, identify ways to ensure regulations and policies are not inconsistent, overlapping, or unnecessary duplicative, including with respect to inspection review requirements by federal agencies and accrediting associations. That's a very broad statement, and I think it opens that window should, as we move forward, the opportunity exists to have that discussion.
Okay, personnel expenses, something FTP's not had any thoughts or feedback on over the years. I think Dick probably said most that needs to be said here about the interesting fact that the Secretary of Health and Human Services has been asked to clarify an OMB position on something. But other than that, I think it all sounds good to me. But anybody else have any thoughts they would like to share with the group specifically about this? Obviously, the pilot projects. Is Debbie in the room? Is she hiding behind a pillar? No. Okay, she's not in the room. But Debbie said at the executive committee, and she may have said earlier today, I wasn't in that session, that as far as she's concerned, the pilots that we did on EFA certification, at least the ONR ones, are done. We're good. We're moving on. And people should be using EFA certification if they so wish to moving forwards. Obviously, this is just reiterating that, I think. That's a fair interpretation? People are nodding at me, or Cindy? Hopefully.
Well, I felt like we had that already, and this saying clarification of the extent to which flexibility provided by uniform guidance applies seems like it's an opportunity for HHS to say, oh, well, not so much. Like, why have that? I don't really understand what good this does us. It scares me a little bit that someone could decide to take it the wrong way.
I mean, it may have been a timing issue as well,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's essentially saying the same thing. It just maybe when it came out, I don't know for a fact, but they're restating something that's already occurred. But by the time, obviously these things take months to write, right? So it may just be more of a timing issue than anything. But we can live in that particular hole unless somebody else has some more knowledge.
Well, I was just going to say, it reminds me of an old saying from Tibet, which is, beware of requests for clarification. So I think what you were saying is it's already been clarified. Let's not do it again.
We're clear.
Anyone disagree with that?
I almost wonder
Well, come and say it.
And this representatives from a very small university that we're in.
Republicans speak so loud.
Yeah, apparently. I have a different interpretation. One of the things that universities are concerned with changing our effort certification process is Inspector General, and are the agencies going to allow it, and all those things. And maybe this is going to allow us to do that. Maybe having DHHS oversee the process and put some extra legitimacy behind it, maybe that will affect change in the government. Maybe I'm just being too happy.
Maybe I'm too cynical.
Okay, moving on, we've only got a few more minutes to go. So the establishment of the Research Policy Board, obviously, this is obviously a big deal, and I obviously when it's a big deal in the fact that it now has to occur and it's got to be created. Obviously, the bigger deal is what does it do? And obviously, actions speak a lot louder than words. And I think while it's very prescriptive on who in the federal government is going to be on this, as Dick said earlier, it's going to be very, very interesting watching the frenzied activity of trying to get 9 to 12 non-federal partners on the Research Policy Board, and who knows how that's going to happen. I mean, we can all fantasize, and you can probably come up with an awful lot of comic strips to graphically represent that as well. But assuming we get 9 to 12 very thoughtful, wise, educated individuals in research administration on the research policy board from our entities and our partner entities in the non-profit world, then potentially this is going to be a good thing, because it's going to be the watchdog, hopefully, that can call to question whether new policies or regulations make any sense, or whether they're being duplicative or adding extra burden. Obviously, until the policy board gets going and starts wondering, working out how it's going to do what its priorities are, I think it's going to be an open question that we're going to have to watch very closely. I think part of the charge of the policy board, and I know when we were having discussions during when we made the recommendation to create such an entity, the FDP was very heavily involved in those calls. The name of the FDP came up all of the time as one of the kind of entities that could provide an awful lot of information to the Research Policy Board, and then also test new ideas that might come up through the Research Policy Board before they were adopted. And I think the onus on the FDP is to remain very closely connected with whatever happens, keep our eyes on it, and offer to help as often and as frequently as possible. But I think there's a real role within this part of the legislation that the FDP, member institutions can really get involved in, and we're obviously involved in some things that are already written into these, the clearinghouse, EFA certification. This is really, we should be trying to partner as closely as possible with this policy board once it's established, and work out who's on it. But it's always a two-edged sword. You never know until it gets going what it's going to do. So it also goes into another Tibetan saying from many years ago: "Be careful what you ask for." So thoughts on the Research Policy Board from people, and maybe this is where, how does the FDP, keep engaged, and what can the FDP offer? Obviously, we're preaching to the choir here, but, some thoughts on that. Obviously, no one's got any thoughts, and the time between now and the next very important session, which, because we're being recorded, I won't refer to, but there's an important session coming up at 5:30. So we'll try and put this one to a close. But I think, Dick mentioned some of the reporting requirements of the Research Policy Board. There's actually called out here, if I read it correctly, there's also reports to Congress directly, not just to OSTP, IRA, and OMB. So, there's going to be an awful lot of eyes on this Research Policy Board to make sure that it's having the impact it's supposed to have. And there is an awful lot of concerns, because I don't know where the staffing is coming from this Research Policy Board. In the original recommendations that we proposed, and this was just a thought, we were trying to set it up a bit like the SEC, and the idea was this was going to be something that the recipients of grants actually helped to fund, and therefore there would be a staff funded outside of would be funded to work on this. Some of this could be done by the FDP, some of it could be appropriated to staff. Obviously, there's going to have to be real work done if any of the things that they're charged with is going to actually get achieved, so that would be interesting. And actually, we have a COGA representative stuck in the back here, so Lisa's got to come to the front.
Actually, I was just going to say...
You have to come to the front to talk, yes, I'm sorry. Assuming you're in the centre aisle, I'm going to have you come down. So you should announce who you are to the masses.
So I'm Lisa Nichols, the Director for Research and Regulatory Reform with COGR. And so I think some of the intent with the legislation was to use some of the existing resources, so including FDP as well as COGR, AAU, and APLU. So you have a staff, you have an association of universities in COGR, and all of the expertise of people like Pamela and Sarah and other board and committee members, Lynette and others here. And so so that is my understanding, is to utilize those resources that universities have already invested in.
And sorry, just to add, I also think in cases like this, sometimes lack of specificity can be useful, right? You wouldn't want 1,000 pages on the research policy board, because then what would the board actually be doing? It would be all spelled out, so.
It's less prescriptive that way, yeah.
Before you move on from cures, can you clarify what was stated about the financial conflict of interest and just-in-time? Is that now something that's being implemented through this law, or is it just being suggested they discuss that? I think Dick mentioned something about the just-in-time and financial conflict of interest.
It was a suggestion that that was one of the areas within the conflict of interest regulations that the Secretary of Health and Human Services should look into. The consideration of requiring the submission of the conflict of interest information to occur at the just-in-time phase rather than at the time of the initial proposal submission.
Any other comments? I just went back to there. And so finally, there's the micro threshold purchase, micro purchase threshold even, going up to 10,000. I think that's probably viewed, generally speaking, as a relatively good thing. You know, so I don't think there's really, it's not really very open to interpretation per se. You know, and so I think that's, you know, all of the work done gathering the data to show how expensive that would be, and then obviously the activities of the advocacy groups has really obviously had an impact. So anyway, so we're almost there. So Dick usually closes these things out with a song and a dance. So I do not sing and I do not dance, and so therefore I'm going to hand the mic back to Dick.
I could sing Yay Alabama for everybody. Get ready for tonight.
I will not sing and I will not dance, but many years ago, along with Denise Clark, who was sitting right up here, looking startled, we did a little skit that included a song from, well, a chorus, no, not that skit. No, this was a song from The Music Man. How many of you remember the movie The Music Man in '76? Well, we wrote a song called 76 Subrecipients to monitor, but I'm afraid that's all I can remember. So, on that note, if there are no further questions or comments, let's thank our distinguished speaker. And a last comment. Yes.
It's just an announcement, so I.
Well, come speak into the microphone.
Do I need to, or can I just holler?
Come and speak into the microphone.
All right. Great. So my message is.
Okay, I am making an announcement about a National Science Foundation session that is going to be held at 8 o'clock in the morning tomorrow on the Intergovernmental Personnel Act pilot that is going on. So it's 8 a.m., but if you can wake up and go, it's going to be very exciting. They are looking for feedback from attendees on the impact of the new policies that are rolled out after the last FDP meeting. The cost-sharing pilot, which includes mandatory cost share of, what is it, 10%, something like that, and then elimination of lost consulting as money that the researchers can ask NSF to reimburse. And also, although it's not straightforwardly a part of the pilot, the new limit on the number of trips back to the home institution is now going to be limited to 12. And so I think for those of you that might be affected or others at your institution that might be affected, please come and provide your feedback. Thank you.
The next session starts soon.
Yeah. It does actually at 5:15.
Oh, it's at 5:15. Sorry, 5:15.